Thank you, John. I just want to read the 4 principles that the expert panel established by which this committee continues to operate. We're to contribute to a more unified and reconciled nation, be of benefit to and accorded with the wishes of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, be capable of being supported by an overwhelming majority of Australians from across the political and social spectrum, and be technically and legally sound. And that has been the premise of both the expert panel and both joint select committees that have undertaken this work. We now open up for questions, and we have 2 people with microphones that will come to you. And we've got our first question over here, and then we'll take the gentleman down the back. If you could stand up so people could see you, it'd be...
Can you hear me? So I think the major question is, how ready are we? I think at Garma there's a lot of kind of preaching to the choir, and you wouldn't find too many people here that didn't think we were ready here, but how ready is the country, who's not ready, and why aren't they ready yet?
Tanya, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that. I think there's a couple of things I'd like to say. One is that I'm not sure in this process if we're ever going to wake up one morning and know for sure that we're completely ready and that everybody's on board. I just don't think that's realistic. But what I do know is that in an environment like this, it's not a waste of time to be having this conversation, because we need people who are supportive to be doing their piece of work to make sure the people that aren't ready become ready. The campaign at the moment's a pretty small team, and we've worked really hard, but we're doing this on the back of an enormous amount of work of the expert panel, but also an enormous amount of work from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander campaigners for decades and decades and decades. And so I think the challenge before us is not necessarily to question why we're not ready, but just to focus on making sure that we are. And one of the things about that means that all of us have to take responsibility for playing our part. So if a group of Australians that are here feel really confident that this is a wise place for us to be going as a country and there's no reason not to, then it's up to all of us to make sure we're part of getting the country ready. We've got a lot of work to do, but at the moment awareness sits at about 49% across the country, which is not bad for a couple of years in. But I'm really confident when I think back to the 67 campaigners who campaigned for over a decade to get that outstanding result. We're doing it in an age of social media. We're doing it in an age where it's a lot easier for us to get around the country than it was for them. And so I think the challenge for us is to take this seriously. As I like to say to people, the Constitution's not going to change itself. So we've all got to do something. We've all got to think about how we're going to sign people up, and not, because I think it's quite easy for some of us who are in the tent firmly to spend a lot of time talking about what we're not liking about the process, or where the mechanics aren't quite working to our liking. And that can be a very elitist conversation. There are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country that are expecting us to have a voice on their behalf. There's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people working willingly alongside non-Indigenous people, and that's the only way we're going to get this done. So there's still a long way to go. The campaign is still in the very early stages, but we also need to remember the no case is starting to take shape, and there's enthusiasm for that. There are people in this country that don't want us to be hopeful about our future, and they will say whatever it takes to scare people away from this conversation. So part of us getting ready is to make sure that we make it easy for people to come into the conversation, to be very clear about what their part is that they have to play, and just get on with it.
Can I...
John?
I'd love to just say that I agree with everything that Tanya's just said. To add, one thing that intrigues and concerns me a little is that the research shows that older Australians are better acquainted and more supportive of change, or better acquainted with the idea and more supportive of change than younger Australians. That's kind of counterintuitive to me, but it's the case, and it's partly social media. I think people tend to follow the news that interests them. So once this gets on their radar screen, I'm sure it'll interest them, but it hasn't yet. That might surprise you, it surprised me, but that's what the research shows. So we've got a big job to do with 20 to 40-year-old Australians. The second thing I'd say is that the awareness levels are quite high. There's something out there, but we need to be really careful we handle this wisely so that people are not able to sort of say, oh yes, constitutional change, this is what they'll recommend and here's why you shouldn't support it. In other words, they'll invent what it is before we've all settled exactly what it is. We've got to watch that. And the third thing that arises out of it is that there will be a requirement for massive leadership across the political divides. That's why I said it's got to be above politics, or it won't go anywhere. And part of that, in my view, will mean resources. We need to have the resources. The government will have to put the resources into building the case. And I think, personally, that it's extraordinary stories told by ordinary people that will win the people who have to make the vote in the end. It's the extraordinary stories like Les Davidson's, the boxer from 1956, who would sadly say, all I wanted to do is represent my country.
I think we're probably readier than we think we are. For a proposition to get up, we need three things. The first is a sound proposition, and I think we are pretty close on that. The things that we agree on across the political spectrum are greater than the things that we don't agree on. The second thing that we need is a mood for change, and again, I think we can get there pretty quickly as well. In fact, I think the longer we leave it, the harder it is to captivate a mood for change. The third thing we need is an absence of doubt, and both Tanya and John have touched upon that issue. There will be doubt, but we need to ensure that the mood for change swamps the absence of doubt, or swamps the doubt that exists there. And I guess I disagree a little bit with John. I think instead of rising above politics, we should do what politics does well and find the areas that we agree on and go out there and advocate those very, very strongly. And I'll just leave you with this anecdote. In 1951, in the middle of the Cold War, a proposition got voted down to abolish the Communist Party in this country. And the reason that it got voted down is that there wasn't political and unanimity amongst the political leaders in this country. If we come up with a proposition that might not be all of our first best case, but is something we can all put before the Australian people as political leaders, then I'm confident that it will get up.
I think I mean by above politics, above party politics is what I mean.
Gentleman down the back.
Yeah, thank you. I think you pretty much answered my question. I was going to say, how do you do that? How do you get above politics and how do you get above party politics? It's easier said than done, I think.
You addressing that to me? Yeah. Look, I think to some extent I'd say look at the people who framed the Constitution. In the things they got right as well as in the things they got wrong, they managed to cross the political spectrum. And we need to do it by focusing on our core values, which is where I agree entirely with what you're saying, the things that unite us rather than divide us. And I would hope that one of the things that unites us as Australians is a recognition that real freedom depends upon us recognising and respecting fully the dignity and the worth of every Australian.
Right, another question. Gentleman right down the back, and then the gentleman in the black T-shirt after him.
Thank you. We've heard a bit about correcting the wrongs of the past, and that I can quite understand, obviously support. I think Australians are very driven by self-interest in the wider community, and I believe in developing the stories around how to move forward, it would be really useful to understand how we can build the case of the wider interest of the Australian community and how, in practical terms, constitutional change can lead to the uplift of our society. So instead of the focus on righting the wrongs, which clearly is a key piece of the argument, it's about how Australian self-interest will be lifted by being a better community and a fairer community, and how those practical benefits will flow to the wider Australian society.
Thank you. Senator Seward first.
Ken and I and Nova have just been in the Kimberley in one of the first legs of our consultation process. And June, I'm just looking for the notes I took from the June Oscar. June Oscar's a really strong Aboriginal woman in Footscray Crossing, who I'm sure many of you know, and have have heard of her amazing work, and she presented at Fitzroy Crossing, and I'm just trying to find the notes that of what she said, because she spoke about why recognition was so important. And one of the quotes, I can't find it, but I'll paraphrase it. She said, you know, we're talking about how Aboriginal people are moving forward and how, you know, we're working in partnership. But she said, how can we work in partnership with broader Australia if only one part of the partnership is recognised? And I thought that was really powerful, and she went on to describe why it is so important. And I think if we start sharing why it is not, you're right, not just about righting the wrongs of the past, but why it's so important for moving into the future, and actually expressing, getting those statements and expressing them and sharing them, I think that will help. Also, I'm not as pessimistic about Australians. I think Australians do care about each other. And I'm not pessimistic that people won't look at, well, why this is important. And if you look at and think about the apology and how important that was, and how many people, I couldn't tell you how many people I knew that just said, we organised a morning tea. And in Perth, it was in the morning, so it was happening in Canberra. You know, we were 3 hours behind then, I think it was. And people were getting out on the foreshore in Perth to watch the apology. People got TVs at work and shared the apology. So I think, and a lot of people were cynical about it, but look how the nation came together then. So I'm not as pessimistic as thinking that Australians don't care, because I actually think that they do care, and I think they care very deeply once you start talking to them about it.
Any other panel member wish to make a comment? John?
Yeah, I'd just like to agree with Nova. I understand the question and I understand the good intent behind it, but I'd be heartbroken if I thought we only responded out of self-interest. I believe there are many, many Australians that are pragmatic people. Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of selfishness now in Australian society. There is. But there are many, many, many Australians who are deeply committed to the concept of what we call a fair go. And we've got to play on that as well. We need to build it up. Here's an opportunity to say, here's a chance to strike a blow for a fair go, which we all say we care about. And you know, there's an old saying, you devalue one life, you devalue all lives. We're all losers when we don't fully recognise the dignity and worth of our fellow Australians equally.
I'll come to Nova and then I'll come to you, Tanya. Nova?
This is probably going to answer a couple of questions, one being yourself. With this movement, what we're trying to do is recognise and acknowledge Australia's First People. We've been here 40,000 years. And I think as an Aboriginal person and a politician, you know, there's a saying, you lead first with the heart, then with the head. And I have to refrain myself at times from saying the things I really want to say because of my political hat. So I'm going to take the political hat off for a moment. Because what we're trying to do is get an entire country to recognise 2% of the population. And out of that 2%, we make up, when you look at the incarceration rates, where Aboriginal people make up 40% of our prison. And everyone gets sick and tired of the discussions about Aboriginal people, blackfellas, being there. Oh, and this is the problems we're going to face, because white Australia think we get too much. But every single day we're going to need a helping hand, because for too long we have been squashed from the earth we came from. And until you truly shift the mindset of white Australians and make you realise that everyone is here, you've all benefited from 200 years of systemic injustices that have occurred in this country. And this constitution is a white fella rule book, right? It's Australia's rule book. Our rules are unwritten laws. And we've had that for thousands of years. And I'll sit here and quite often I sit back and I listen to the conversations because I'm probably the most optimistic person you'll ever meet. You know, I came from stolen generation descendants, my mum, but within every single Aboriginal person is a spirit that needs to be awakened. And I've come and gone to 2 Olympics, 2 different sports, won medals like you wouldn't believe. But I woke up because my mother never gave up and neither did my grandmother. And we are the most resilient people on this planet because we're here, we've survived for that long. So this movement can't come from Aboriginal people who constantly don't have a voice. I'm here, Ken's here, but this movement needs to come from white fellas because you need to realise that you're here in this country and us as Aboriginal people, we are prisoners in our own country. And until you realise that, we are literally just wasting our efforts on trying to... It's not a wrong made right. And I don't want to be an Aboriginal politician going out there or a traditional owner and begging white fellas to recognise us because you're killing us. You're killing our spirit. And I sit here and sometimes I struggle to think, why? Because if I go away, then there's no voice in certain times. So the thing is, just because you know an Aboriginal person doesn't mean you understand us. And I wake up and I don't understand white fellas at times. So, you know, it's a two-way street here. And we can't do this alone. And it frustrates me. And it's like what Tanya was saying, we've been talking about this for decades and decades and decades, and it can't fail. Because it simply can't. So, you know, like, as the oldest collective race of people in the world, we are fighting to be recognised in a country, and you should be embracing the history. Everyone comes to Garma and you're uplifted by people. And you know, I can look around here, there's not a lot of people, Aboriginal Yolngu people here, because we know who we are, we know where we come from, we know the songlines, we know our descendants. If this is about anything, it's about Australia acknowledging and recognising the true history of this country. Because in the wider community, it's irrelevant when we've got chronic disease, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, high incarceration, low education, numeracy, I could go on forever and ever. It can't come from us. It's got to come from you, the non-Indigenous people who call this place home.
Thank you, Nova. Tanya.
I feel like I'm about to say something completely insignificant now. Thank you, Nova. That was very generous.
Well done.
A Torres Strait Islander man came and met with the recognised staff a couple of weeks ago, and he put it really simply. And it was in the context of us having a conversation about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that don't support constitutional recognition. And what he said is, there's no reason not to support this, because otherwise what people are saying is they want to build the house without doing anything about building a foundation. And I feel like that is partly why we struggle with some of those other practical issues, including things like roofs over people's heads. This isn't a process that creates a situation where we've got to choose between constitutional change, other practical concerns or other bigger aspirations. This is just one thing that has to get done. And I just think in the most simple terms, you can get very caught up in technical detail, but if you just think about it as us getting the foundation right so every other building block will stand and be sustained, that is also what this is about. We can get caught up in what's hard about it, but ultimately all we're really doing is saying Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have always been here, our culture counts, and it's something that we can all be proud of as Australians, and it's also time to do something. I mean, think about it for a second. It's 2014 and our constitution still allows racial discrimination to exist. I think a lot of us will end up being quite surprised just how many Australians that doesn't make sense for.